I experienced this during my early 20s. I was employed at a mall, and due to insufficient hours, I inquired about alternative options. My supervisor informed me that the other mall's opening weekend required more staff, so I could visit there on weekends. I had to take the longer bus route, but I didn't have to make any transfers. So I got up early and caught the earliest one. The bus ride was fairly standard. I was able to explore areas of my hometown that I had never encountered before. The bus seemed to end up in a more dusty neighborhood with lots of trash, abandoned structures, houses, and cars. I felt like I was on the right path there, and it turned out to be a safe destination. There was an elderly woman who got on the bus, and I noticed that nobody was getting up to give her a seat. Therefore, I gave her one of mine and proceeded to hold the pole by its side door. I remember looking at a guy next to me and asking if he knew how long it would take to get to my stop, but before I got off and the buzzer went out. As the doors swung open, I felt my hands gripping my free arm, and they grabbed me and pulled me away. Upon hearing reflex, I instinctively threw my fists in the air because I generally avoid physical contact with strangers except for greeting and handshakes. My intuition quickly told me that someone was trying to pull me off the bus, so I took it easy. A man, dressed in a white tank top, blue jeans, and white tennis shoes, entered the rear of the bus, grabbed my arm, tried to pull me away. I was just hanging on the pole when he pulled me down to the second step, and I didn't even know what was happening. He had my purse on his arm, and I attempted to move it down when I saw him. It worked, but he didn't care about it. I had just started calling for help, and then someone pulled me back towards the bus, grabbing my waist and pulling me towards it. It appears that the man who was trying to pull me down had no idea that his efforts would be in vain, so he gave up and ran away. That was the end result. I can only recall hearing one more thing from the man who saved me. "You're going to die in that neighborhood," as he ran away with the door shut. It seemed like I was in a state of shock, as I only remember saying, "Oh, I don't even thank you." My lack of communication with the driver, inadequate police contact, and confusion about my shift at the other location have left me feeling confused. I can't remember the ride home. It was like being dead inside. At home, I was dressed in my nightgown and ready for bed, but when I sat at the edge of my bed thinking, is it likely that I had been almost kidnapped? I was on the verge of being kidnapped. I had a lot of regrets about this. I wish the guy had called the police if he were going to chase after another woman. I wish women would be aware of his presence, and I regret not expressing my gratitude by keeping in touch with the person who saved me. I posted an article on my local Craigslist with the hope that it might be heard by him, and I am extremely grateful for the opportunity. In 2008, when I was only 20 years old, I secured my first genuine job as a pub bar in Trent Bridge, Nottingham. The living conditions in Lenton were not ideal for me and my parents. During their divorce, the house was always in disarray, so I relocated to a small bedsit on Bunbury Street for my first job, which was nearer to my workplace. I must admit, it was a terrible phase in my life, but transitioning to bedsit was an absolute bonus and provided me with reassurance at the appropriate time. My lack of possessions made me feel like I had to go somewhere else, have a place to meet new people, drink some vodka, and dine with my parents. Despite the wallpaper peeling and one of the windows being stuck, I didn't care much about the minor issues. The lads who used to stay occupied at the bus stop on Bathley Street until late in the morning were what I was paying attention to. I noticed them a few days after moving into this enormous 2-story building where my bedsit sits, which is now an academy for Nottingham's bus drivers, when one of the windows looked out at Bathley Street where the bus stop was located. Upon returning from work at midnight, I found myself in a peaceful room that was quiet and had screamed with laughter. I gazed out of my window and witnessed a group of young males in their late teens and early 20s taking shelter under the bus stop. At first, I assumed they were waiting for the last bus, but as time went by, they continued to be noisy and wouldn't come back until after midnight, leaving me to speculate that they had converted a hangout spot for safety reasons. They were not too bad that night, and passed out shortly after I woke up, but on other nights they were just a nuisance. The summer season would see them scream and laugh until the early hours of the morning, especially with severe weather conditions that made it difficult for them to avoid. They took a short break during the Christmas season, but once it started to warm up, they would return every night. They only moved on involuntarily when someone contacted the police. Once I witnessed an incident where individuals with indecent things leaned over and mouthed their dirty laundry to the authorities before dropping off their small police documents on the ground. I believe that the police eventually retracted their investigation, and one of the lads was present at the bus stop, leading to people avoiding it and opting for alternative options. They were a legitimate source of discomfort, but apart from their smoking in the bus stop and being unpleasant, I don't believe they committed any illegal offenses, so there was not much law enforcement to do about it. The weather changes from winter to spring, and as soon as it started to warm up, the lads re-established their presence at the bus stop. I used to be able to sleep until the next day, but that changed when I started sleeping for extended periods. My sleep was disrupted by the non-stop racket that they made, and I had to use earplugs and listen to music to get a restful night. It was a shame that I didn't have access to your knowledge during that time. Several times I observed blue lights flickering through the blinds and felt an extreme pleasure when 2 or 3 noisemakers were apprehended for their hidden items, but that didn't stop them from doing it. My thoughts are unsure of what they were thinking at the time. If I were that person, I would have found a different place where the police wouldn't bother me. It seems likely that they were insistent on attending, possibly due to a person who wanted to know about the police presence on Bathley Street. The lads at the bus stop were not being approached by a marked police car, but rather an unmarked one. They would be surrounded by a regular-looking Vauxhall Corso that had just begun rolling, followed by an outnumbered cop who then proceeded to scamper off. During one night, I was indulging in Grand Theft Auto, which had just been released and was quite weak. As I was returning from a bathroom break on the way back to my hotel, I saw the young men in the bus stop and pondered why I hadn't seen them since then, as I knew they were going to keep me awake that night. As I watched them, an unmarked car approached them and slowed down, stopping approximately 10 or 20 feet away. The thought crossed my mind, "Oh, let's have a police encounter." Typically, the police emerged and began chasing people. The person who was content to idle a few meters down was pleased with the outcome. The men at the bus stop evidently believed that it was the police, and I suspect that only one person managed to escape after receiving a gong. Instead of running, the remaining individuals stayed stationary and began tossing messages at the car that was in motion. I was ready for some street theater, so I gazed out the window smiling, hoping that their swift dispersal would make me feel comfortable and peaceful. Prior to the sudden change in the scene, I remember my thoughts being directed towards an unmarked dark car that had no markings on it and prompted me to take action. Subsequently, they executed. A sudden burst of noise caused one of the bus stop's male passengers to fold. It's evident that he just fell. His head hit his knees before his body fell to the floor, similar to what happened after the bang. It was probably one of the most terrifying things I'd ever witnessed. The night I learned that no matter how many Tarantino films or FPS games you watch, there is nothing that can prepare you for seeing someone get shot with your own eyes. In retrospect, I believe that the gunshot caused the unfortunate child to have a broken vertebra above the waist, which could explain why he fell in an unusual manner. The statement conveyed to me suggests that I would have been aware of his shot to the head, as there was likely a very small amount of it. Upon realizing what I had observed, I reclined beneath the window and sought refuge behind the brick wall below. Although my voice was melodramatic, there may have been some unexpected fire from the escapees. I'd never seen anything like that before, and I didn't know what to do. Instead, all I heard was the sound of burning rubber as the dark hatchback sped off into the night. The gunshot was so loud it sounded like a firework, and since there was no reason to shoot someone, I'm confident that others in the vicinity were as worried as me. The 9-9 received hundreds of calls from the Bathley Street and its surrounding areas, but I was unsure of what to do with my time. The only thing I truly understood was that the poor lad required assistance. No one deserves to die in such a manner on the street with their friends having just run off Jesus Christ. I had a lot of conversations with the police after that night, using both phones and face-to-face situations where we discussed my statement and asked more questions. As far as I know, The police appealed for more information, but no one was arrested or convicted. It was widely believed that the incident was linked to a gang, but I doubt the police ever brought it up as they didn't have any clue. I was uncertain about going to court due to the possibility of witness intimidation, but it didn't occur. They never inquired of me, and from what I understand, the poor lad's murder has remained unsolved even after all this time. After a year, I relocated from Trent Bridge when I had enough money to do so, and an adequate rental apartment began appearing on the market. No one remained at the bus stop for the remainder of that time. Upon getting on the bus, I would occasionally catch a glimpse of it that night, looking lonely and alone without anyone else around to see. The sight of that young boy's corpse, its disintegrating folds, always resurfaced in my mind, and I'm glad to have left where it was with such a terrible memory. Currently, I am a woman from Europe living in one of the major cities in South America. Despite being foreign, I didn't feel any threat or danger during my stay in the area for a month until yesterday. I was alone and waiting for the bus on a sunny afternoon at approximately 3 p.m. with no one else around. A man suddenly appeared out in the open. The reason for his shadiness is unclear, but it appears that he was walking straight towards me, even though the pavement was quite wide. I faked not seeing him and waited for him to leave, but he approached me and demanded money or something, and I didn't comprehend his words. I firmly declined, acknowledging that I didn't have anything to offer him, and slowly stepped back, holding my hand high up. I felt uneasy as Every kept approaching me and repeatedly pointed his finger at my face, promising to kill me. It was then that I began to suspect that, despite the fact that the man had no weapon on his head, I could be in trouble, particularly since he was very close to me and still threatened to harm me. I'm still trying to remain calm and avoid displaying my panic. I went out looking for someone to assist me, but the street was completely empty. I witnessed a bus approaching at that moment. I strode towards it and the doors were already open, so I entered without any hesitation. The driver's aide instructed me to hurry into the car, and after seeing the scene from afar, he assured me that we could only avoid this crazy man. Within a mere 30 seconds, this event occurred, but there is ambiguity regarding what could have gone amiss in that brief period. I'm relieved that I didn't get too anxious, and I might as well buy a pepper spray. During the year 2015, I resided in Seattle. My office was located where I could bring my 100-pound German Shepherd dog to work. Despite being a big lover, he can still be intimidating to unfamiliar individuals. One day, I boarded the bus that took 45 minutes to reach my workplace. I saw someone staring at me, but didn't take much notice of it. Although it's unsettling to be around, I did have my fair share of strange conversations on the bus and unexpected odd behavior. Honestly, I don't recall much about his looks, but I do remember thinking that he looked normal and not too drunk or high. Despite being on a busy street with less visibility, my bus stop is not frequently affected by traffic. Upon reaching the stop, my dog and I set out on the short track home within a few blocks. Upon leaving the bus, I noticed that the man who was watching me had also exited, and something wasn't quite right. It looked like he was trying to keep up with me, trailing behind. It has been said in the past that if someone is following you, you shouldn't just go straight home. Although I am aware that certain situations call for increased security in one's home, I didn't leave the stranger at my doorstep because nothing seemed to have happened. My partner was not at home, so I opted to wander around my neighborhood for several blocks to try and get him out. It's possible that I had a desire to be certain whether I wasn't being closely monitored or if this person was walking in the same path. It took me a few blocks to realize that he was trailing me. I was scurrying around and he was walking in the same direction. We didn't communicate with each other, and I was growing increasingly frustrated that no one would attempt to follow a woman home. I couldn't find anyone around me who could offer me assistance as the streets were quiet. If I had been alone and not accompanied by my dog, I wouldn't have been surprised that this was happening. I can't imagine anyone with their own mind would be interested in following someone around with a giant German Shepherd. After turning around at the corner, I sped away from my path and stumbled onto a walkway that bordered one block of occupied housing next to mine. The expectation was that the pathway would encircle the house entirely to avoid being caught by someone, but I was met with offense and didn't have time to reconsider. I was ultimately confined in this hollow of a house, fence, and hedge. I sat down with my dog and waited for the man to pass us. I observed the man walking past the walkway without any indication of our presence. He didn't even look our way or pay attention. I opted to stay there for a few minutes to ensure its absence. My dog was able to rest peacefully by lying down on his side and taking a nap, which was very helpful. The man resurfaced in my line of sight after 3 minutes, just as I was about to go home. He didn't make eye contact with me the first time he passed by. With a deliberate and composed move, he abruptly stopped just off the curb in front of me. He was about 2 yards away, facing me and not looking directly at anything, with a sidewalk and grassy strip in between. I witnessed him begin to empty his pockets. He was removing several metal items and placing them in a line. Despite my ignorance, I'm glad I didn't uncover their identity. Upon receiving the call, I informed 911 that someone was trailing me and behaving strangely. The police arrived promptly, prompting the dispatcher to advise me to exit the scene. I closely monitored the ambiguity in my hiding place and followed a non-directional route back home, as my house was visible from the spot where I found myself. I'm uncertain about what occurred with him, but fortunately didn't come across him again. I'm not sure if he was under the influence of drugs, mentally unstable, or both. Although I am uncertain if his actions were malicious, I do hope he received the necessary assistance. At 18 years old, I'm a transgender man who was not very good on the exam. It took me 16 hours and some switching to get a Greyhound bus pass after being in an online relationship with someone for about 18 months. Since an ADI, Ohio was one of the bus stops. This is the first time I've been to an out-of-state state and taken a bus other than school buses, and I was alone. I'm around 5'2" and it was likely 4 or 5 a.m. when we arrived in Ohio, considering my height. While I wait for my next bus, I am confronted by a smelly man with an unknown license plate who is dirty and spotless. After a brief conversation, he asked me if I could engage in sexual activities that were grossly inappropriate. I'm already panicking and I feel a sense of dread as I look at the people next to me and pray for their support. It's clear that I communicate with the man periodically, asking if he can sell me. Now I stand up and run as far out as I can before contacting my dad. The guy vanishes and I don't have any contact with him. The tumultuous part is that I finally get to know the girl, who discloses to me that her father had a heart attack. I had to leave because he had turned into a hoax, in my opinion. I had already spent my money on food, water, and a taxi to get from the last bus stop to her city, which was expensive, before having to pay for gas with my friend. I was unable to secure a room and my dad couldn't afford to pay for it, so I had to wait until 8 a.m. to catch the bus in town. As someone who was born and raised in Arizona at the age of 25, I thought it would be a great opportunity to share this experience with you all tonight. Being a heavy smoker, I avoid driving. I opted to take a bus and journey down to the dispensary by myself. The time frame for this was around 8:30 p.m. I was in the market for a new indica cart, and Purple Punch is by far my preferred choice. After obtaining it, I headed back to my house and proceeded to walk towards the bus stop. As I made my way towards the bus bench, I came across a man sitting there. I didn't give it much thought. Being antisocial makes me ready to be quiet in any social setting. This time I didn't get to enjoy it because he starts acting unkindly towards me while I'm sitting down. My headphones were on, but I couldn't hear him properly, so I removed them and asked what it was. He asks, "Why do you want to have your hair cut?" With their wide eyes, he stared at me without blinking an eye. I would wager that he was on the receiving end if I were a gambler. I'm not here to make judgments about anyone, but my understanding of addiction is quite profound. I was unprepared for the question and awkwardly replied, "Okay, so it's fine." It caught my attention that he was wearing an Arizona Cardinals jersey, and I am also a fan of the team. I'm a big Cardinals follower, but my entire social network is comprised of sports-related individuals. He chuckles at me for a second. "It's been a few months since I received this message." He asserts that. Then I ask, "How many years have you been cutting your hair?" He answered without any hesitation, "Just started with it a few months ago." "Who was the one who taught you how to trim your hair?" I inquired. More detailed details are being presented at this stage. He shifted his gaze and then stated, I discovered my own. Gentlemen, I would like to touch my back a little. Keep in mind that he was always trying to cut my hair during the entire discussion. I even informed him that I have no money on hand at this time, asserting that I would be unable to pay for the service even if it was necessary. However, he replied with the words, "It's fine. I packed my clippers in my bag. Say what you will." I recently began to be sincere with a guy. "I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable with strangers giving me hair. Can you feel my presence during the night and when I touch?" The dude maintained his facial expressions throughout the entire encounter. He ultimately departs. It is accurate to say that, and persists in projecting a glance into my soul. It was that time when I decided it was best for me to leave that location. It's fortunate that the bus stop was spelled out front of Circle K, our local gas station, for those unfamiliar with the term. I walked into the place for a brief period to catch some tea time because the bus was not present for another 17 minutes. My decision to stay was based on the fact that I didn't want to be perceived as something other than stealing by the employees. I had a good reason to go inside, so I waited for only 6 to 7 minutes before the haircut guy entered and looked into my soul as I stood. Luckily, I went past him and didn't leave until I reached a different bus stop on the way. The bus eventually arrived at the destination. I saw the man in the back of the bus, but he didn't bother me anymore. I maintained a completely opposite gaze of him throughout the entire experience. Despite the fact that most social situations I'm in are quick, I tend to overthink them. What would you have done differently? Did you think it was appropriate for that guy to cut your hair? A 10-year-old Belgian girl named Natalie Gies Brex was waiting for her school bus at a stop in Loms Prabot on the morning of February 26, 1991. She resided in the slumbery, lower-middle-class neighborhood of Leiftal with her parents and younger brother Anita, Eric, and little Bjorn. Every morning she was dropped off at the bus stop while her mother took her younger brother to kindergarten. The next day, on February 26th, Natalie exited the car's back seat to say goodbye to her mother and young Bjorn before observing them drive off. While doing so, Anita took a last look at her young daughter in the rearview mirror. Her daughter made her feel a great deal of pride, which was quite impressive. The manifestation was exhibiting the level of rationality and independence that predicted a prosperous and distinguished young lady. Anita was not well informed. The last time she would see a baby Natalie alive was with that look. Witnesses later reported that Natalie chose to walk towards a nearby forest, which was called the Boxy, instead of staying stationary until her bus arrived. An unidentified man was reported to have come up to her and appeared as she approached the tree line. Natalie appeared calm and followed the man through the trees. While driving to work, another close family friend drove by the Boxy Woods and saw a gray Toyota that appeared to be experiencing engine problems. The driver appeared to be aware of his actions, yet the family friend did not offer any assistance, despite being in the back seat with a smile and wave. The family friend didn't suspect any suspicious motives for the incident, as the girl appeared to be in a positive state of mind. It was only later that they realized its importance. A few hours later, at about 10 a.m., Natalie's parents were called by telephone to their places of work. Their daughter was absent from school. Patrick Giasprecht called his daughter's home phone, hoping she would respond by saying she was sick and had gone back home instead of taking the bus. Han drove home to search for her himself when he received no response. The Giasprecht's family was in a state of panic for several hours as they sought the assistance of friends, relatives, and neighbors to locate her in Leifdal. They also contacted the local police, filed a missing persons report, and made sure they too joined the search for Natalie, who had disappeared. Police conducted a massive search and rescue operation on the second day of the search, which involved searching the Boxy woodland and its surrounding area. During the interview, volunteers placed missing poster boards in the middle of the town, while Natalie's parents were interviewed by various national media outlets to bring attention to their situation. Regrettably, only a few individuals provided any information, leading to an ever-insidious investigation into Natalie's disappearance. Natalie's parents had finally begun to entertain the unimaginable after almost a year since their daughter went missing, but her absence and never return were ever mentioned. The police had significantly decreased their search and had acknowledged that the likelihood of her safe return was minimal. Despite this, Child Focus had recently taken an interest in Natalie's case and worked to keep the story in the public eye, while also finding new information about her possible whereabouts. In collaboration with French authorities, Child Focus named a potential suspect in the case of convicted kidnapper Christian von Goloven. Natalie's killer had been involved in evil activities not only in Holland but also in Belgium, and despite the absence of any physical or circumstantial proof, the French authorities informed her parents that they were confident in their ability to arrest her killer. Some believed that the physical evidence would be found soon, but Child Focus began to consider other possible suspects after another year was passed and Van Goloven neither arrested nor charged. The kidnapping, violation, and murder of 6 Belgian young girls were carried out by Marc Dutroux, who was identified as the suspect. It was in 1995, more than 4 years after her disappearance, that the truth began to surface. It has been suggested by some that Dutroux may have taken a 4-year hiatus between murders, which is not entirely obvious, as is often the case with new serial killers. According to some, the existence of other suspects who were frequently involved in the murder of children during Natalie's disappearance makes them a more plausible suspect. Michael Stocks, a Belgian truck driver, is one of the suspects being held in Holland for the murder of 3 young children in 1991. A former cellmate of Stocks reported a shocking allegation to the police in 1992. It was during one of her most heartfelt conversations last night that Stocks supposedly confessed to abducting the child from a bus stop in the early 90s. He went so far as to highlight the simplicity of convincing the girl that he was her parents' friend and that they had requested him to ride her to school. Surprisingly, his car smashed into the road in front of many onlookers, but there were no sightings or answers, and the abduction had been successful. At the time, Stock's cellmate found the story so unbelievable that he didn't report it. The cellmate was not prepared to put their neck in danger due to Stock's exaggerated boasts, despite the fact that Jailhouse was hiding his business. As the months went by, and Stock's former cellmate became more aware of Natalie's disappearance, he realized that all of his statements were accurate. Following their disclosure of information, the police acted on the cellmate's allegations and apprehended Stocks on suspicion of Natalie being abducted. Stocks vehemently denounced the accusation, asserting that he was not in Belgium on the day Natalie vanished. The tachograph from the truck Stocks used for work was found by the police only hours after his arrest. The police discovered that Stocks was present in Metz, France, on the day of Natalie's kidnapping through a tachograph. This evidence, once presented on paper, was convincing enough to exonerate Stocks, and he was released without charge. Nevertheless, in reality, it implied the monstrous pretext of a man who had always intended to exploit children. The occurrence of truck drivers mishandling or swapping a tachograph was not the first time they had attempted to hide an inconvenient fact from outsiders. If they were to do so, Stocks would be a highly intelligent and potentially lethal predator. It wasn't until the spring of 1993 that investigators finally found their ring finger. An in-depth examination of Stocks' tachograph revealed signs of interference. The investigation found that Stocks had falsified several documents related to his planned routes, indicating that he was instructed to take one route but ultimately chose another. Following the revelation of fresh evidence, Stocks was arrested again on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. If the investigation turned to a sequence of unexplained traffic stops, he would ultimately be apprehended. The detective's claims were so alarming that Stocks chose not to offer a confession. He admitted because of how unbearably ambiguous they were. It would be an understatement to say that the Dutch detectives were shocked when Stocks finally admitted to killing her. According to certain sources, the number of interviews Stocks received during his second stint in custody is believed to be around 100, but he unwaveringly rejected all claims made against him. Out of nowhere, he suddenly gave up. In 1991, he confessed to killing a young girl, but the girl was not of Belgian origin and wasn't named Natalie. Known as Jessica, she was originally from the Netherlands. Police heard about the incident in the ensuing hours, how Stocks had taken one girl from swimming pool in northern Dutch village of Zwag, while Natalie's body had not been found yet. In addition, Stocks admitted to committing the violation and murder of two German boys, Marco Weiser, 13, and Salim Tatil, 10, who were from Wiesbaden. The Dutch police suspected that Stocks had also been victimized by Natalie, but he denied the allegation. He maintained that his murderous spirit had started in July 1991, not February, and despite being discovered to be lying about his location, he denied being in Leaf Thaw on the day of Natalie's abduction. Many investigators were convinced that Michael Stocks was the perpetrator of Natalie's disappearance, and that this was a falsehood. But they had to take the opportunity, and instead of spending more time and resources trying to get Stocks out for murder, they were on the other three and sent him to prison for 20 years. Stocks was enrolled in an occupational therapy program run by the prison 8 years after his sentencing in September 2001. The use of turpentine and fluorescent lights in his work resulted in Stocks accidentally setting himself on fire. Despite being transferred to B of Revocht, a burns unit with specialized treatment, his body was burned by third degree over 60%, and he died on September 25, 2001. It was reported that Jessica Lavon's parents openly celebrated the news and even hung a flag in one of their homes. There were differing opinions on whether Stocks' death was caused by an assassination attempt or his own suicide, but everyone maintained that it was a fair justice system and gave him some hope. The tragedy that killed her father had a lasting impact on their once close-knit family, according to Natalie's brother in 2011. The reason for Natalie's absence was a lack of knowledge about her location, according to him. Closing would be a blessing, he said. The questions left unanswered were a curse. According to Natalie's brother, her father is known to come to the bus stop where she went missing on occasion. The forlorn belief is that sheer determination could lead to a revelation. To this day, Natalie's fate remains unknown, and the monster who took her might still be among us. On February 10, 2009, David Fortal, who was 14 years old at the time, asked his mother if he could borrow a car to go to school. Alma, a small city near Lake St. John in Quebec, Canada, was the home of his family. On February 10th, the region experienced one of its coldest winters. Despite the frigid weather outside, David's mother was already feeling overwhelmed by the day, and so she declined his request in a courteous manner before continuing with her routine. David didn't seem to be very disheartened. He put on his red winter coat and left the house before heading down the street to catch a bus. After less than 15 minutes, David's school bus pulled up near his residence, and at least half a dozen children packed onto the big yellow vehicle. Nevertheless, David was not among them. Approximately 6 hours after his mother reported him missing to the local police, a detective asked if she had seen any unusual activity related to David's recent disappearance. She possessed. At approximately 4 a.m. that morning, David had entered her bed, repeating his routine from his childhood when he was small, and had gently requested them to hug her. During breakfast, David had barely tasted his food, which was unusual considering his famously large appetite. According to his mother, David had been subjected to a relentless bullying campaign in the past few months, and had spoken about being targeted for violence on the night before he went missing. But slowly, David's mother began to realize her son was not disappearing as mysteriously. After a public appeal for information about David's whereabouts, local police received several reported sightings. One person claimed to have seen him walking through Medebecquin, while another stated that they saw him in Lac Bouchette, towards the more rural areas north of Trois-Rivières. Both witnesses also described a teenage boy in the red jacket, among other things which convinced David's mother that the sightings were real. Despite her ignorance, she had no idea what David might be up to in that vicinity, except for his sneaky attempt to escape from home. A driver who had been driving a truck claimed to have given David ice cream on the day he disappeared, was called to the police 5 days after his disappearance. David was picked up by him on a tranquil country road near Berteville, which is about 4 hours away from Alma, his place of birth. David must have already been hitchhiking with another driver, as it's unlikely that he'd cover almost 100 miles on foot in just 10 hours. The truck driver stated that he dropped the boy off at a small Catholic shrine located on the side of the road. In Quebec's rural areas, where the roots of these shrines can be traced back to the deeply Catholic French ancestors, many Canadian truck drivers stop to light a candle instead of seeking safety during their journey. The driver who provided young David with the truck was equally enthusiastic and guaranteed that he would be back on the road soon, as the shrine was an ideal location for him to hitch a ride. He didn't make a mistake. After the driver lit his candle and placed it next to the shrine, he observed a blue 4-door subcompact pull-up beside David before being invited inside by its driver. Following that, the truck driver underwent an extensive polygraph examination to verify the validity of a statement. He consistently remained truthful, and the truck driver, who was previously seen as a significant person of interest in the case, was eliminated as an alternative suspect. In an effort to locate David before he was injured, the police conducted extensive searches throughout the area and launched a poster campaign to increase public awareness of his disappearance. The publicity campaign yielded thousands of potential tips, but only a few of them were useful, and even those that were considered feasible were not useful. The police arranged for specialist divers to search the surface of the Pith Disharge River, which flows through Alma town. Hundreds of volunteers from various parts of the country, national and international organizations, came to the town to search for missing items and distribute them. A $10,000 reward was presented by the Canadian Youth Organization, but it was not successful in creating a viable lead, leading to dimmer prospects. The most widely accepted theory was that David had joined the wrong person on a ride after fleeing from home due to his fear of being bullied. To what extent was the school's condition unsatisfactory? At 6 years old, David faced difficulties in adjusting to school life. Despite being diagnosed with ADHD, the drug riddle seemed to have short-term benefits, but David's speech blockage was severe when he began attending elementary school. The teasing was so intense that his teachers would leave school early to ensure he didn't have to face the same resistance from other children as before. Despite the fact that children have always been mean, it appeared that David was at the bottom of an extremely harsh social ladder due to his upbringing in a toxic environment. A year before his disappearance, David was 13 and had been returning home from school when he was pursued by a group of children who then ran into Stoop and pilfered his bike. However, the suffering didn't terminate there. The group dragged poor David to a creek nearby, which was covered in filthy ponds, gum, and mosquito spawn, and then forced him into it. After squishing water from the creek, David drove to the house of his older cousin, Maxime, who offered him a shower, gave him clothes, and called the police. Despite his concerns and anger, Maxime believed that David had been unlucky due to the schoolyard bullies, but this was not accurate. A group of approximately 20 middle school students had assembled outside Maxime's residence before David finished showering. They urged David to step outside and confront them, but they only dispersed when they saw a police car driving down the street. Upon their arrival, they observed that Maxime was fully aware of the dire state of affairs. David's education suffered greatly by the end of 8th grade, and he was placed in a class for children with minor learning difficulties. The bullying only escalated, and some of the children who had shown kindness towards him in the past started to join in on the harassment, which David undoubtedly found particularly distressing. Maxime was troubled by David's tendency to go for extended walks after dinner in December 2008. He had also been a victim of bullying during his childhood, and he only went for long walks to clear his head when repressed. David's mother was cautioned by Maxime, who pleaded with the vice principal of his school to take action against the bullying. The vice principal's pledge to act was disregarded when classes resumed after the holiday season. Almost dinner time on January 28, 2009, David's mother called Maxime in a state of blind panic, and David had not returned home from school. Maxime climbed into his truck and drove away in the darkness to find his cousin. Following this, David was discovered in Levin-Nodelpult, one of Alma's primary roads. He became extremely cold and was unable to speak fully sentences after getting into the passenger seat of Maxime's truck until he had warmed up enough to move forward. According to reports, David claimed that he couldn't endure anymore. Until the bully and issue could be resolved, David was kept at home from school for 2 days. Nevertheless, the local authorities reminded her that David was legally bound to attend school until he turned 16, and she would be in danger of facing legal action if she did not comply. David Fortone was forced to return to school on February 2nd of 2009, just before he went missing in less than a week. The True Negotiator, a popular TV program in French, is broadcasted in Canada. Claude Poirier, who used to be a negotiator turned crime reporter, hosts it, and it is similar to English-language programs like Frontline on PBS. It covers high-profile global events and criminal justice cases in the public interest. David's disappearance was the focus of an episode of the show in September 2011, which also disclosed some confidential information to its viewers. After making his own plea for information, Poirier claimed that he was called by a member of the public. According to the speaker, they had first-hand knowledge that David was being assisted by an unknown person. They asserted that David was prepared to go home, but only if those who are providing assistance are not held accountable. The caller stated that if they were charged with the disappearance, they could have potentially made David commit suicide. David's family adherence to a strict religious sect, which was implied to be the Jehovah's Witnesses in some texts, was one of the reasons for his disappearance, as per an anonymous source before concluding the call. In response to the question of whether there was such thing, David's mother denied being a member of any religious group. She stated that David's family was incapable of overseeing any efforts to assist him and urged the anonymous caller to provide additional information. Regrettably, the caller did not reach out again, causing some to question the authenticity of their victims. Is it justifiable for a mother to attempt all she could to bring her troubled son home? Despite her numerous appeals to the public, no one provided an accurate result, and David's ultimate fate remains a perplexing and deeply disturbing mystery.